It's your boy PJ. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, like, and share the content, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the second episode of the PJ Hoops podcast. I'm your host PJ, and on today's episode, this is going to be about the post-draft, just my thoughts, my opinions on the draft, who was selected in the top 10, my winners and losers of the draft, and also some of my sleepers of the draft. And so we're just going to dive straight into it. I'm just going to go down and give you all 30 players that were selected in the first round, and then I'll give my thoughts and opinions on it, my sleepers, and then also I'm going to dive into some of the trades that happened on draft night too, because there was quite a few trades that ended up happening on draft night. With the number one pick, Atlanta Hawks ended up taking Zachary Richelet out of France, small forward. If you're more interested and want to know more about these prospects, please go ahead and check out my last video I made. I did a pre-draft analysis. I had my friend JJ come on with me last episode, and we kind of talked about our favorite prospects, their player comps, and what we thought potentially they may or may not land. But yeah, so Zachary Richelet, small forward out of France, got selected by the Atlanta Hawks at number 1. Number 2, it was Alex Sarr out of France, a center. He ended up getting selected by Washington. Number 3 was Reed Shepherd out of Kentucky. He's a point guard / shooting guard. A little undersized. He's 6'3". He ended up going to the Rockets. Number 4 was Stephon Castle out of UConn. He's a combo guard, point guard / shooting guard, combo guard. Number 5, this is where the shocker was with Ron Holland at number 5. Most people had Montes Buzelis going to Detroit at 5, but Ron Holland ended up jumping him and going at number 5 to Detroit. It's going to be interesting to see what Detroit ends up doing with their spacing, simply because you got Cade Cunningham, who I think Cade can shoot. Cade's a good shooter. Jaden Ivey, he showed a little bit of improvement, but he's still not there. You got Holland, which people are questioning his shooting. I think he'll be able to at least become a league average player, but for this first season, it might be rough. We'll see. Anyways, Holland at 5. I was high on Holland. To me, his player comp was like a Jaylen Brown. If you look at Jaylen Brown back at Cal, he really couldn't shoot. Ron Holland kind of reminds me of him, but yeah, they took Holland at 5. And again, if you want to know more about these prospects I'm talking about, please go back and check out my last video about the pre-draft. Number 6 was Tijani Solano out of France, power forward. He ended up going to the Hornets, which, again, was another shocker. I seen some rumblings saying that he might go a little higher. I didn't know he was going to the Hornets. Thought that was interesting, but I thought it was good for them. Tijani Solano is a defensive player with offensive upside. The Hornets need that. They need defense. I thought this was a good pick by them. We'll see how many minutes he gets his first year, but I think he'll be able to contribute on the defensive end for them at some point. Number 7 was Donovan Clingan out of UConn, a center. Portland ends up grabbing him. They were very high on Clingan, and from what I understand, they've been watching Clingan since he was a freshman at UConn. They've been on him. So I'm happy to see Portland end up grabbing him, anchor that defense. Portland kind of got a logjam at their big man position, so it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing there. They have to decide on DeAndre Ayton if they're going to extend him. I think he has until, the 14th of July or like mid-July. They have to decide if they're going to extend him. They also got to decide if they're going to extend Robert Williams as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what Portland ends up doing at that center position, because they got to make a decision there. Number 8 was another shocker. It was originally the Spurs who was supposed to pick at 8. They ended up trading out at 8 with Minnesota. Minnesota ends up moving up to 8. I'll go more into the to that trade details a little bit later on. But yeah, Minnesota moved up to 8, grabbed Rob Dillingham, which I thought was a great grab by them. Rob, to me, again, reminds me of a little bit of like a Lou Williams type player. Him backing up Mike Conley for a year or two, I think is going to be really great. He's going to come in and be able to give them instant scoring. So I think that's great for Minnesota, and that's what they're missing, was more scoring. So good for Minnesota at 8 to go up and grab another guard. Number 9 was Zach Edey to Memphis. Again, another player where it was like they had some mock drafts had Edey going in the late lottery, but I also did see rumblings that, hey, he could go as high as 9 to Memphis. if Memphis couldn't move up to get Klingon, which they were unable to do that because I guess the asking price was it was too much. They couldn't meet the asking price for Klingon. But anyways, Memphis ends up grabbing Zach Edey at 9. I think Edey's going to be able to give them 20, 25 minutes a night, that's all they need. They just need a man to come and give them 20 to 25 minutes a night. So Jaren Jackson don't got to play center that much. And I think Jaren Jackson was a lot better at the power forward position. That's when he won Defensive Player of the Year. So I thought that was a good pick by Memphis. I know some people are not that high on Zach Edey. But I think him being with Memphis, I think that's going to be a good spot for him. I think it'll be good for him at Memphis. Number 10 was Cody Williams to Utah. I thought this was a really great pick by Utah. Later on I'm going to talk about my winners and losers of the draft. Utah, they're in one of those categories, either my winner or loser. But I thought Cody Williams was a really good pick for them at 10. Number 11 was Montes Buzelis out of the G League Ignite. Again, there was rumblings Buzelis was going to 5 to Detroit. Like, that was pretty, I thought that was a lock. They needed more shooting. So for him to go to 11 to Chicago, he's from Chicago. He's a Chicago native. So I think that'll be a good spot for him. I think Chicago will be a really good spot for him. He'll be there with Josh Giddey, with Kobe White, Patrick Williams. I think that'll be good for them. But Chicago is one of those teams that are going to have to make a decision on what they're going to do, with their team. So they're a team to be watching out for. Number 12 was the Thunder. They took Nikola Topic out of Serbia. To me, Topic, again, check out my last video because I go more in deep dives on these prospects in that video. But Topic to OKC, I feel like OKC basically just grabbed another Josh Giddey with higher upside than Josh Giddey. For basically for only the salary of the number 12 pick instead of having to extend Josh Giddey, which they traded Josh Giddey for Caruso, which I thought was a good trade for both teams. Number 13 was Devin Carter out of Providence, point guard. Again, Sacramento literally traded Davion Mitchell, literally just drafted another player that is better than Davion Mitchell and Devin Carter, but can do the same things. So good for Sacramento. 14 was supposed to be Portland. Portland ended up trading 14th pick to Washington. And in that trade, Washington received Malcolm Brogdon, the 14th pick in this draft, which ended up being Bud Carrington, which is a point guard out of Pittsburgh. They also received a 2029 first from Portland, where it's kind of the protection's kind of weird. So they get the second most favorable pick in that draft. Portland has 3 first-round picks in 2029. They have their own, Boston's, and Milwaukee's. So basically, let's say Milwaukee has the 5th pick, Portland has 14, and Boston has 29. Essentially, the Wizards would get the second best pick, which would be that 14th pick, would go to the Washington, and Portland would just keep whatever's the best and whatever's the least favorable. So I thought that was a good trade for Portland. And in exchange, Portland got Denny Advi, which Advi kind of had that third year, fourth year growth spurt. He ended up going through his little progression this last year and grew a lot as a player. So I think this is a really good grab for Portland. Denny Advi is going to be able to run a little bit of point forward for them when you have Scoot and Shaden off the ball sometimes. I think in transition, he's going to be able to really command the offense really well. And defensively, him and Bilal Coulibaly were the best defenders on that Washington team last year, and Portland got him for a steal. His contract actually basically regresses as he gets deeper into his prime, and he's only 24. So he's just started his prime this last year. So Portland, I think, got him for a steal. Malcolm Brogdon was on an expiring contract anyways. Plus, they needed to free up that backcourt for Shaden Scoot and Anthony Simons for the time being. Number 15, Killian Ware out of Indiana. This kid, Killian Ware, was a highly rated kid out of high school. I believe he was top 15, and I think he was second at his position out of high school, either second or first. He was really highly rated out of high school, but he ended up going to Oregon his freshman year. Didn't really work out with him and Dante, the center that was at Oregon too. And they had another kid that was from Crater, Oregon. He was there too at Oregon. It just didn't work out with him at Oregon. He ended up transferring to Indiana this last year. Basically had a great breakout year at Indiana. Averaged pretty much almost a double-double there. I thought at 15, Miami got him. I thought that was a really, really good grab for Miami. Simply because, Bam, I think Bam is better suited as a power forward than he is as a center. So this is really good for them. Grabbing Killian Ware at 15, I thought was a great grab. And I can see him getting started and potentially starting on their team this year and getting him in that Heat culture. I think is going to be really good for him. He's somebody to be keeping your eyes on. And when I talk about my sleepers a little bit later on, you might hear his name come up. Number 16 is Jared McCade out of Duke, point guard. McCade, to me, is a sharpshooter. I'm a Duke fan, so I watched McCade all last year. So Philadelphia grabbed him at 16. Number 17 was Dalton Connect out of Tennessee, small forward / shooting guard. He went to the Lakers at 17. 18, the Magic took Tristan da Silva out of Colorado, small forward, can score, really good offensive player with solid defense. Number 19 was Jacoby Walter out of Baylor, went to Toronto at 19. Jalen Tyson out of Cal. He was one of the players I didn't do too much of a draft like dive in, and I feel like I kind of maybe should have. But I think Cleveland got a solid player that can do some scoring for them at number 20. 21 was Yves Messi out of Baylor. He went to New Orleans at 21. Number 22, Phoenix, ended up trading 22 to Denver. So 22 was Denver's pick. Denver ended up taking Deron Holmes II out of Dayton, which, if you watch my last video, I kind of hint on Denver should take him. He kind of reminds me again of a Bobby Portis, but I go more into a dive on him as a player in my last video. So please go ahead, check that out. Let me know what you think about my player comps and stuff in that video. So Phoenix traded out of 22. Denver went up to 22. 23 was AJ Johnson. AJ Johnson played over in Australia. He was a highly rated kid out of high school, decided to go play overseas. Didn't perform that well overseas, but for sure showed glimpses of being able to score out of the pick and roll and getting downhill and scoring. AJ Johnson has promise as a shooting guard. And who knows, maybe Milwaukee did it again. Maybe they hit lightning in the bottle. Because to me, again, this is a draft that kind of reminds me of that draft with Giannis and Anthony Bennett went 1, which I think was 2015. Or I think it was 2015 that was that draft. Or 2014. Somewhere in that range, I forgot. But yeah, maybe they just struck lightning in a bottle with AJ Johnson at 23. 24 was the Knicks. The Knicks ended up trading Keyshawn George to Washington. And they ended up grabbing at 20. Who did they end up grabbing at 24? I can't remember. I'm going to dive more into that later, more of the trades. I'll be able to look at the trades and go more deep into that later. But yeah, Keyshawn George went 24 to the Knicks. 25, the Knicks grabbed Pacamo Diet out of France. High potential for this kid out of France. I was kind of surprised he went in the first round, but he went in the first round to the Knicks. Maybe the Knicks, struck lightning in the bottle with him. We'll see what happens. Washington at 26 took Dylan Jones. He ended up getting traded to the Thunder later on in the night. I'll dive more into my trades in a little bit. Number 27 was Terrence Shannon Jr. to Minnesota. Great grab by Minnesota. Combo guard, can do a lot of scoring. Again, Minnesota needed more scoring from their guard position, okay? And so I thought they did a really good job at grabbing Shannon, grabbing Rob Dillingham. 28, Denver, again, I said traded out of this spot with the Knicks. But they ended up taking Ryan Dunn at 28. Ryan Dunn ends up on Phoenix at 28. And so, yeah, Phoenix ended up grabbing Ryan Dunn at 28. But they also ended up getting the 56th pick, which ends up turning into Osadaro. I think I pronounced the last name wrong, but he's out of Marquette. He's the big man out of Marquette. He ends up on Phoenix as well. Phoenix also gets a 2026 second-round pick, and they get a 2031 second-round pick from Denver. But Denver moved up, grabbed Deron Holmes. Deron Holmes going to contribute right away for that Denver front line that needs help. So I thought that was a really good grab by them. 29 was Utah. Utah took Isaiah Colliner. Isaiah Colliner's out of USC. Isaiah Colliner was the number 1 rated point guard in his draft class. He was number 1 rated point guard in his draft class out of USC. Out of high school. He was, I think, from Atlanta. But yeah, Utah grabbed him at 29, which I was surprised that he dropped that low. But at the same time, I understand why he dropped that low based on his production at USC. USC, he was also injured. He was also sharing a backcourt with Boogie Ellis, who Boogie Ellis is an upperclassman, and Boogie Ellis, I believe, was a junior or a senior. But yeah, he was sharing the backcourt with Boogie Ellis. He also dealt with some injuries, so I can see why he dropped to 29, but I think that might be still at 29 for Utah. Only time will tell. Number 30 to end out the first round, Boston took Baylor Shireman out of Creighton. He's a bigger guard, bigger two guard. He can shoot really well, so that's what all 30 teams, who they ended up taking in the draft. I'm also now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit. I kind of want to talk about some of these trades that ended up happening in the draft. And then after that, I'll talk about my draft winners and my draft losers. So I kind of talked about one of the trades that kind of happened with Portland and the Wizards. Kind of hinted on that a little bit already. I thought that was a really good trade for Portland. I don't really know what the Wizards was doing there. I can see, I guess the win for them is they can ship Brogdon to a contending team later and get more assets maybe later on for Brogdon. But they also, they got themselves into the 2029 draft. Got a first out of Portland for Denny Odve. But I still think Portland won the trade. But only time will tell. Who knows? Maybe Bud Carrington will turn out to be some stud. Because he has potential too. He ended up, he's 6'5". He was a freshman at Pitt, kind of ran that offense. I thought he did really well. I watched him a little bit. Because I'm a Duke fan, so kind of paid attention to Pitt. But I guess we'll kind of see what he ends up turning into. I just talked about the Deron Holmes and Ryan Dunn swap between Phoenix and Denver. I thought that was a good trade for both teams. I thought it was really good for Phoenix getting Ryan Dunn, who, in my opinion, is the best defender in this draft, but also getting a couple second-round picks because they're going to be kind of in a cap strangle for a while. So I thought they did really well there. Another trade that took place was with the New York Knicks and the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards ended up receiving Keyshawn George, which my guy that was on my pod last episode, JJ, he's really high on Keyshawn George. Keyshawn George ended up growing into his body. He's like 6'7", 6'8" now. He used to play point guard when he was a lot shorter, so he has those guard skills. He showed a little glimpses of I think, really high potential at Miami. But so the Wizards ended up trading into the first round and grabbing him. And the Knicks ended up getting Dylan Jones at 26. And they got the 51st pick from Washington. That was a trade that ended up happening. But then after that, the Knicks traded Dylan Jones to the Thunder for 5 future second-round picks. The Thunder have a boatload of picks. They can, so they unloaded a bunch of those picks, grabbed Dylan Jones. Dylan Jones is a big guard out of Weber State. He's a big guard. He's a big dude, man. Big old tank. Can get downhill, get to the rim. He can play make a little bit. So be interesting to see what the Thunder plan on doing with him. I noticed that the Thunder really wanted to get some more ball handlers on their team. So, I thought that was a really good trade. Another trade, and arguably the biggest trade of the night, was Rob Dillingham going to Minnesota. And the Spurs receiving a 2031 first-round unprotected pick and a 2030 first-round pick swap, which is top 1 protected. Spurs got some more assets. Timberwolves got another scoring guard to help Anthony Edwards in the backcourt. And again, I think Rob backing up Conley for these next 2 years are going to be pivotal. I think it's going to be good for his growth. And we shall see what happens. Conley has 2 years left on his deal. So for sure, Rob is going to back him up this first year, unless he, is just blitzing in summer league or something, or in training camp. But I expect him to come off the bench, which I think is going to be really good for him to be on a championship team and to be coming off the bench. Another trade that happened was in the second round. The New York Knicks ended up getting Portland's 34th pick. They ended up taking Tyler Kolek, which I'm personally high on Tyler Kolek. I think Tyler Kolek's going to be a really, really I think he's going to be one of these backup guards that's going to be in the NBA for a long time. I think he's going to be a really good backup point guard, really good out of the pick and roll. He ran the Marquette offense beautifully. And I don't know if he led the NCAA in assists, but I think he was top 5 in assists in the NCAA. I like Tyler Kolek's game. I like his game a lot. And again, my last video, I talked more about Tyler Kolek and his player comps and what I liked about his game. But yeah, so Knicks ended up grabbing him. I think it'd be really good him backing up Brunson. And we'll see what happens with Deuce McBride. Be interesting. We'll see what happens there. But what Portland received in this trade was 3 future second-round picks. They got 2027 second, 2029 second, and 2030 second from the Knicks, which I thought was really good value for Portland. I would have liked to have seen them keep Tyler Kolek, but I also understand why they didn't keep him. I get that. I get why they didn't keep him. I get why they wanted the draft comp instead. But I personally would have liked to have seen him back up Scoot and just kind of been a part of this young core with the Blazers. That would have been nice to watch and see. But we're going to switch up gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about basically my draft winners, my draft losers, and yeah, we're going to just go straight into it. I'm going to talk about my losers first. And my first loser, we just kind of talked about them a little bit. The Knicks. And I know you're probably like, what the heck? Why do you think the Knicks? You just said Tyler Kolek was a good pickup for them. I think they're my losers just because they didn't grab Ryan Dunn. And I think Ryan Dunn is a Tom Thibodeau type of guy. So I would have really liked to seen him with the Knicks coming in, giving him that defensive intensity. He would have the Garden rocking on defense. I would have liked to really seen them get him personally. You can also put here Milwaukee. You can say Milwaukee was a loser because they took A.J. Johnson instead of somebody that may have been able to contribute right away, because I don't know if he's going to be able to contribute right away necessarily, but we'll see. Maybe he will. Again, Milwaukee struck lightning in the bottle when they found Giannis, okay? So maybe they just got that eye. But I would for sure say the Knicks is one of the teams here I would put there. Another team I felt like kind of lost. So this team to me didn't lose the draft, but they lost the draft lottery. And that's the Toronto Raptors. So a couple years back, Toronto traded for Jakob Poeltl, but they also gave the Spurs this year's first-round pick, but the first-round pick was top 7 protected. Ironically enough, the pick ends up number 8, so the Spurs got their pick in the draft. So that's why I consider Toronto a loser here, because they didn't get their pick, and they ended up picking 19. They got Jacoby Walter. We'll see what he becomes. He was, I think, the number 1 rated shooting guard out of high school. Didn't play that good at Baylor, but was kind of sharing the backcourt with upperclassmen there. So we'll see. Maybe he ends up being really good for them, which I think he might end up being a nice little 3-and-D player. But yeah, I'm going to have to say they're a loser because they don't have their lottery pick. They lost their lottery pick that night. Another team that I would consider a loser is the Philadelphia 76ers. They ended up taking Jared McCade with their pick, which, again, I'm a Duke fan. So, seeing a player that they took wasn't good. I thought they should have taken Dalton Connect at 16. I feel like he would have kind of fitted what Philadelphia was trying to do a little bit better than McCade. I thought Dalton's a bigger guard. Dalton can shoot really, really well. I would have liked to have seen him with Philadelphia, with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey instead of McCain, which McCain's for sure coming off the bench, whereas Dalton may have been able to be more of a starter potentially, depending on what kind of lineup they wanted to do. I just thought they should have taken Dalton instead of McCain. So they're one of my draft team losers, but let's not worry about the losers anymore. Let's talk about the winners of the draft. The winners of the drafts to me, last year I said this team, and they did it again this year, is the Utah Jazz. I thought they were a winner. They grabbed Cody Williams at 10 from Colorado, which, again, watching my last video, I kind of go more in depth about him. They took Isaiah Colliner, and they got Kyle Filipowski in the second round, which Filipowski is one of my actual second-round sleepers. I'm going to dive a little bit more into him a little bit later on. Another team I thought won on draft night was the Blazers. I thought Portland did really good. They got their future defensive anchor in Donovan Clingan, which I really like. I really like that pick for him. I kind of dive into him a little bit more in my last episode as well. But they also traded for Denny Advi, which I thought was a great pickup, and I talked about that a little bit early on. Another team I thought that won, kind of been talking about them most of the pod, is Minnesota. They grabbed Rob Dillingham. They got Terrence Shannon. More scoring punch at the guard position. Minnesota needed that desperately. And these two little dudes are going to be able to come in and get buckets. I mean, Terrence Shannon, if you're not familiar with his game, he basically carried that Illinois offense last year. Lefty, bigger guard. I think he's 6'4", 6'5", can get fouls, can just score, man. He's a three-level scorer. Same with Rob, 3-level scorer. He's a little shorter. Rob's like 6'1", 6'2", a lot shorter, a little skinny dude. But these are dudes I think could potentially can see action this season for sure. For sure. So I got to shout out Minnesota, man, and their front office, because they did a great job at grabbing those two players and adding, and realize we need more scoring in our guard position. It can't just be Ant. So I wanted to give them a shout out. Another team that I feel like did really good, and I kind of talked about them a little bit earlier too, was the Thunder grabbing Nikola Topic, if he didn't tear his ACL and re-aggravate it again, Nikola Topic was probably going to San Antonio at 4. So for him to drop all the way to the Thunder grabbing him, I thought was a steal. I watched a lot of film on Nikola Topic. He was a maestro out of the pick and roll. Great passer. His shooting was streaky, but very promising to me. I kind of talked about him more in my last pod. But yeah, I thought that was a great pick. You basically traded Josh Giddey and brought in another Josh Giddey with higher upside than Josh Giddey, potentially. I thought OKC did great. I thought that was a steal. And there's other teams I thought that really that had steals too. I thought Phoenix grabbing Ryan Dunn was great. He's one of my draft sleepers. Another one of my draft sleepers. Everybody's been talking about it, but he's still a sleeper. I think it's Dalton. I thought Dalton Connect was still a sleeper. For him to fall to 17 of the Lakers, I just hinted on it. I thought Philly should have taken him at 16. They didn't take him. He dropped 17 to the Lakers. I thought that was a draft steal for the Lakers, and he's going to be able to contribute day one. He's getting minutes. He's going to get minutes on that Laker team, and the Lakers need the shooting. But other players, I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper. Another player who I thought was a draft steal was Cody Williams to the Jazz. To me, he reminded me of Kawhi Leonard at San Diego State. Very strong lower body, and he seemed like he just played at his pace. Very high basketball IQ. And if he's anything like his brother, it's going to be a steal for the Jazz. And for him to be with that young core with him, Keontae George, Taylor Kendricks, and we'll see what they do with Walker Kessler. But Walker Kessler, and they have Bryce Sansaban. The Jazz is building something, okay? The Jazz is building something, and I thought that was a steal. Another team that I thought had a steal was the Miami Heat when they got Killian Ware. I talked about that a little bit early on as well. I thought that was a steal to me, in my opinion. I think he's going to end up being a steal. Ryan Dunn from Phoenix. Landed with Phoenix. Ryan Dunn's from Virginia, but landed with Phoenix. I thought that was a steal to me. He's the best defender in the draft. And for Phoenix to be able to grab him, last year is funny because last year Phoenix grabbed Tamani Kamara in the second round. Portland fleeced them and ended up grabbing Tamani Kamara. So I think it's interesting how they go back into the draft to get another defender, but I think Ryan Dunn defensively is going to be better than Tamani Kamara. So shout out to the Phoenix Suns, James Jones. They did a great job in drafting Ryan Dunn. And so that's kind of just my opinions. And so I'm going to give my kind of personal opinion on basically how I thought the draft was, in my personal opinion. Well, so to me, I kind of talked about this a little bit last episode. To me, this draft is full of a bunch of rotational players, a bunch of role players. And in my opinion, role players win you playoff games, superstars win you series and championships, okay? So to me, this draft is just as important as any other draft, with less, obviously, superstar upside. But this draft still, to me, you're going to have in my opinion, I think in 4 seasons, we're going to look back on this draft and see a lot of quality rotational players in this draft. And to me, that's valuable. That's extremely valuable when you can think about that. With these players potentially going to be able to contribute to teams and championship teams and maybe even rebuilding teams. I think there's going to be a lot of quality players in this draft when we look back on it. But next year's draft is loaded. Loaded, okay? Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Ron Harper, they got Nolan Traore. I think I pronounced his last name wrong. He's from France, point guard from France. They got Hugo Gonzalez from overseas. Next year's draft is loaded, okay? So it's going to be interesting to see what some of these teams do this offseason to kind of determine, okay, we're going to position ourselves for next year's draft. And then even 2 years out, I'm going even deeper. 2 years out, that draft is going to be, I think, it's going to be pretty star-studded at the top with AJ DeBostis and Cameron Boozer. If you're not familiar with both of those players' game, I would highly recommend watching film on those two players. They're gonna be studs in the NBA. But yeah, next year's draft is loaded, and the year after that, I think, is gonna be pretty solid too. So, but grab your quality players in this draft, and that's what I feel like a lot of these teams did. The ones that my draft sleepers, the teams that were winners, I feel like they grabbed really good rotational players. And who knows, maybe one of those players will turn into an all-star. We don't know, but that's the beauty of sports in general. We put our opinions in it, and, we find out what's true and what's not later on at a later date. But yeah, that's kind of my draft thought, and kind of just, again, I kind of just showed you guys and let you guys know what the draft is in 25 and 26 are looking like. Like, again, they're going to be loaded. They're going to be really good drafts. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to watch players get drafted in those drafts as well. But yeah, that's kind of my draft analysis on my post-draft thoughts on this year's draft. The next time you'll see me, I'm going to give it about maybe a week or two and kind of let the free agency period, because it just started off. It kicked off today. And I mean, there's a lot that already happened. Chris Paul signed with the Spurs. Paul George looked like he's leaving the Clippers. He's probably going to Philadelphia. KCP signed with the Magic. Looks like Klay Thompson is leaving the Warriors. There's a lot of moving parts going on. DeJounte Murray obviously got traded to the Pelicans. So my next episode, I'll be covering free agency. I'll be covering more trades because there was trades that happened outside of the draft. And next episode, I'll be covering that. And also next episode, I'll be going down and kind of just giving you my opinion on all 30 teams in the NBA in something I would like to call, it's called rebuilding, contenders, reconstruction. And rebuilding are obviously teams that are obviously rebuilding. And then we got contenders, which for me, contenders, I'm just going to put in a kind of a larger bubble. It's going to be your play-in teams, playoff teams, and championship contender teams. And then we got reconstruction, which is deciding, okay, are we going to try to become contenders, or are we going to strip it down and become rebuilders? I'm going to go through all 30 NBA teams and give you my opinion on which one of those three each team, kind of which category they fall into. But also another important dates to kind of keep your eye on is July 6th and kind of throughout the month of July. Mainly July 6th, though, because July 6th is an important date for a lot of teams, because a lot of teams got to determine if they're going to extend certain players by the 6th. And then also, again, just throughout July as well. But really the 6th is an important date. Really for the hometown team, the Blazers, they got to decide if they're going to extend Anthony Simons by the 6th. And I think by the 18th, they got to determine if they're going to extend Robert Williams and DeAndre Ayton. So, yeah, next pod, I'll be covering free agency, trades, and then also outlooks for all the NBA teams. And I just want to take this moment and thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of the PJ Hoops podcast. Again, I'm your host, PJ, and I'll see you in the next one. PJ out.